Hello, everyone. This is the Plane Camp Conversations, and I'm here with Rafe Kelley, which has been a huge and immense source of inspiration from me. We are going to learn much more about him and also about Evolve Move Play, which is his main way of working with people in nature, and all his background coming from amazing things in martial arts as well as in parkour, and how from that moving parkour to the nature, then starting to explore the possibilities of how to help humans to move again like humans, how to help people to move like humans, and all the different trainings and retreats and workshops that he does that I found extremely amazing. And you can go to his website, Evolve Move Play, and find more about the retreats, about awaken your movement or return to the source, and all these adventures in different locations around the United States as well as beyond, as I believe. So, Rafe, thank you very much for being here, and tell us a bit more about the Evolve Move Play.
Yeah. Sorry, just to clarify, my name is actually pronounced Rafe. It is short for Raphael, but I'm not sure. So,
Super, Rafael. Good.
yeah. So, Evolve Move Play is basically an ecology of practices designed to help people live more meaningful lives. It has evolved over a long period of time. I've been doing it for 10 years. It started really as just wanting to connect the martial arts and parkour and my own desire to train primarily in nature. But over time, through the events themselves, we discovered that people were hungry for a sense of deep connection, and that people were really experiencing life as very meaningless. And when you're able to bring people together in a tribe, in a natural setting, do intense physical challenges that involve fear, overcoming our hesitations, and working together and moving and singing, making food together, all these things, they start to add up to create a deep sense of connection to the self, right? They understand themselves. They can see themselves more clearly after these kinds of experiences. And then to the world, right? Both the world as a place we can move through. Like once you've climbed a tree, you see that tree in a new way. And then the world is a set of objects that we can manipulate. Right? What does it mean to be competent with our hands and our body to be able to swing a stick around, to be able to throw, to be able to carry things, to be able to make food, to be able to make fire, to be able to gather. And then the world of other embodied agents. What does it mean to have greater depth of potential for connection and different ways of connecting with other people? And then last, this took us a long time for me personally to sort of accept it, but there is a necessity for people to have some kind of connection to the transcendent. We think that even here, when we can use a movement practice, it integrates all the aspects of the self and brings us into a relationship with the world. So when we stand in awe before a waterfall, or get together in a group and dance and sing, we start to feel connected to these transcendent forces that we all live in relationship to. And so fundamentally, we think that modern life is very unhuman, inhumane, what we do to ourselves. And living as, you can see here I am in a box, right? I'm in a room and I'm sitting at a desk and here looking at a screen. All of these things can act to sort of disassociate us from these fundamental forms of connection. So people need to intentionally begin practices that take them back into those connections. So that's fundamentally what we're
doing. And I love it because I can reflect so much on my background on spirituality and psychology, with both the thing of how the world is something that we utilize, and it's an approach in the Plane Camp philosophy of available assets, like everything around can be utilized for play, like other people or elements. And then I love the philosophy around what is the meaning of things, because in my case, I found it through connections in the present moment, and especially the joyful connection. So what I would like to ask you here is more about how play can can deepen these connections, and also what is play for you, because many things can be play as well.
Yeah. So evolvement play is the name of what we do because at the time that I created it, the idea was essentially that we had a fundamental problem in our culture of lack of access to movement. We didn't recognize the importance and the power. So we actually evolved to be animals that moved all the time, that primarily interact with the world through movement. And it's through movement that we even learned, or we even developed the capacity to think. Right? And thinking is in many ways just movement. We model movement in our head. That's one of the main ways that we actually think. So we evolved to move, and then we have a movement culture where we tell people they need to exercise, which is basically taking our capacity to move and trying to formulate it as a factory product so that you can have a sports car model body, kind of, right? And this is, everybody wants to look good naked, but most people hate the experience of exercise. Whereas every child knows the joy of playful movement. And so my fundamental idea was that if we could get people back to playful movement, then they would begin to do all the things that make them fit from a place of joy instead of a place of drudgery and shame. So that was the inspiration behind what we did. So I was influenced, of course, by my background within parkour. My wife, Beth Kelley, is actually a master's in anthropology who did her thesis on parkour as a form of adult play. So she dug a lot into the play research at that time, dialogue with me about it. So she was studying books of Piaget, Becca, Paxep, and later I encountered the works of Stuart Brown and Frank Francis, which then kind of was an alternate path for me to reading Piaget and reading Paxep in particular. And then later I encountered Jordan Peterson, who was another person who was deeply inspired by both Piaget and by Paxep. So all of that is kind of layered into my work over the years and given me a perspective on it. So play is essentially, I think from an evolutionary perspective, what play primarily does is promote behavioral flexibility and capacity to have options. So if you think of a model organism like a rat and put it in a new habitat, its first reaction is going to be to freeze because it doesn't know if there's predators or dangers. Once something doesn't come along to try and eat it right away, they'll begin to explore. And over time, it will discover, okay, here's where the water is, here's where the food is, here's where good bedding is, right? And it'll develop a routine where it moves through. It imitates its own path. But after some period of time, it will start to vary its routine. It will just add variation. And there's no immediate functional relevance to that variation. But what it does is it creates the capacity in the organism to adapt to changes in that environment. So that's one fundamental aspect of play. And so within like Jordan Peterson's model, we start with a exploration, and then we find routines, and then we move into play where we're adding variation intentionally. And then play can be exacted up into ritual. And then we act it out, and we tell stories, drama, literature. And then philosophy, in some sense, is emergent from these underlying layers. Like one of the points that I think is really important that people deeply, deeply misunderstand and have forgotten is that philosophy was born in the Greek gymnasia, which were places where people got together to engage in physical practice. So Plato's Academy was the academy before Plato showed up. The academy, the Akademos, was actually originally a place where people went to worship the goddess Athena in an olive grove. And around that olive grove grew up a space of physical practice. People got together to run races, and to wrestle, and to box, and to throw things, and to basically train themselves to be hoplites. So there was a integration in the beginning between the philosophical, the physical, the playful. And we see this all over the world, right? If you look at the internal martial arts in China, Bagua, Jingyi, Tai Chi Chuan, they're actually Taoist martial arts. They're part of ecologies of Taoist practice, which includes a philosophical aspect as well as religious practices. The cultivation of wisdom being something that's completely divorced from the body is a mistake that we've made as a culture. So that's one model of play. I also look at Yak Peng's work in particular is about rough and tumble play. And rough and tumble play is basically a game where two animals that will have to potentially solve a problem where they have to fight without killing each other, such that one can become dominant and have resources and the other is subdominant but not dead. They learn that you can improve your chances of doing well in those by playing out the dominance conflict many times. And so in all these different animal species, there's rough and tumble play. Juvenile animals engage in lots of rough and tumble play. And then one of Piaget's ideas is that actually the whole moral world, all of our social world is built up off this basic layer of playful interactions. That's how we begin to develop theory of mind. That's how we begin to just everything. Everything is a game. And you're scaling up from fundamental games. And if you're good at playing this game and good at playing this game in a way that makes people want to invite you to not just play this game with them, but other games, that's how you become good at the meta game of life. So that's kind of a very wide sampling of some of my ideas around play.
Yeah. And I love the concept also because that's something that I approach life as a game. And for me, the way of winning life is when you play with joy, like moment by moment, versus being in a state of anxiety and stress or depression. And also because you mentioned like how play integrated into civilization and into thought, into the development of thought, then I would like to ask you more towards the aspect of nature into play. Like, what is the effect that nature brings into people? Because you have been working with many people in different retreats and workshops on the nature. So what have your observations on this?
The term nature itself is an interesting term, right? Because human beings is a product of nature. And so then in some sense, if everything that we create comes from us and we come from nature, where does nature begin and end? But the way that I think of it is that we tend to experience the world as distinguished between the world created by our culture, the world of artifice, and the world that the rest of life is participating in. So if we were ants, we might think of the anthill as not nature, and the skyscraper is nature, right? And for us, there is this fundamental distinction that we experience, and that's really, I think, archetypally deep within us. And I think that human beings have a deep craving for relationship to the rest of the life world. The green growing things, and the four-legged things, and winged animals, right? All of that is the environment in which we spent almost all of our evolution, and our ability to attune to that environment and to work well with that environment was the arena in which we succeeded or failed. And so when we are removed from that arena, we are removed from our own habitat. We're removed from our own awareness of what we really are. So when we take people back into the natural world, we are essentially just re-embedding them in the web of the rest of the life world. And people are deeply, deeply hungry for that. And we don't realize just how completely disconnected we are from it. One of the, I think a lot about the question of meaning, ultimately from movement practice is to experiencing a meaningful life. And there's a simple way in which we are literally bringing meaning into the world. So, fundamental idea that comes from ecological psychology is that the meaning of an object is not intrinsic to the object. It's not objective, right? It's also not subjective. It's not imposed, right? So romanticism sort of says that the meaning of the world is projected by a human being, whereas sort of materialism says that reality is just the object. But what ecological psychology shows us is that there are real relationships between us as agents and the world as an arena. And that's what the meaning of something is. So a cup can be ceramic, it can be metal, it can be plastic. It can have a handle or no handle. It can be cylindrical or square. It can be bold. It can be more open at the top. It can be closed. And if you try to train a computer to recognize cups and only cups, it's very hard because there's almost an infinite set of variables that can be contained within a cup that are not, that are not distinguishable easily from other things. So there's something that makes a cup relevant to a human being. And that comes from the fact that human beings have a need, which is to ingest liquids. And we have a fundamental capacity, which is to grasp things. A cup affords us the capacity to grasp and then to drink out of. And that is the meaning of the cup. Now, if a predator comes into this room, if my mind is flexible, this cup is no longer a cup. Now it's a missile weapon. Yeah. And creativity in human beings is actually a lot about the ability to see all the potential meanings that are inherent in this object. Okay, maybe this is it holds a page down for me. Or, I can put it in against the door to keep the door from swinging, the doorstop. I could use it in my hand to do teacup drills. Now it's a tool for physical training. So when the average person walks past a series of trees, all they see is a kind of green wall. And they may know that trees are, say, important for air. And maybe they provide habitat for animals, but they don't probably even know what the tree is, what species of tree it is. Now, when you start doing parkour and you climb in the trees, now all of a sudden you're layering in meanings, new relationships built. This tree has a branch that I can vault on. This tree has a good climb. This tree I can swing from branch to branch. So those are meanings that you're mapping in the environment. The same thing happens in the urban environment. We call this parkour vision, but it brings a kind of enchantment into the world because all of a sudden there is these felt sensual in the self recognition of capacity to engage in play and engage in a joyful way with the environment around us. And if we then see the tree from the perspective of, say, nature connection practices, we can see that the tree has a specific relationship in the ecology around it, that it can be a source of maybe fiber for making rope, or it can be a source of fiber for making a tinder bundle to start a fire. It could be timber that we use to build something or to make fire. It can be a space where we get eggs or honey or fruit or nuts. And so all those things literally now make that tree have layers, more meaning. And what we experience as modern Westerners is because we're not raised in relationship to the rest of the natural world. We are actually blind to these relationships. We're illiterate. I had this experience once I had started parkour and I was moving through the trees. I had a time where I had a little bit of a nervous breakdown. I couldn't train parkour, and I was walking through the park, and so that I could still see the jumps that I could do, but I didn't have access to them. And somehow it attuned me to all the other relationships that I wasn't seeing. I suddenly had this feeling that as a modern Westerner moving through the natural world, it was kind of like being a illiterate person walking through the Library of Alexandria, right? Like, here's all these stories, here's all this incredible knowledge, and I'm blind to it. So when we can open our eyes and see what's in it, and we can cultivate our capacity to recognize those relationships, the world becomes intrinsically more meaningful for us. And that turns out to be profound transformation.
Yep. Yeah, I was studying, I was doing a few years of a PhD about the relationships of nature within the people cognitions and people emotions. And there is something that resonates a lot also. And it's a bit of a Taoistic paradox as well, which goes around me being embedded into nature, realizing the infinite amount of functionalities and potential of the elements that are around me. And the beauty of spirituality for me and the way I understood Taoism is like how limited the rational mind is to understand the reality around us and the perception. And I believe that there is something there on the neurochemical processes and the different parts of the paradox of realizing that I have infinite potential of possibilities all around me. And that's the paralyzed reaction of the fear of, okay, I'm so in awe of the infinite amount of things that I can do that I need to come back to the centeredness of not doing anything, just to try to process this in a non-rational cognitive way, because it's not possible. There is such an amount of data. And there is something which appears here, which is intuition, which is like this more primal way of processing information. And to ask the question about intuition would be like, what is the role of intuition into physical movement or physical play? Because in an environment as parkour, I'd imagine you don't have time to think. Your brain is thinking for you in ways that are not conscious.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the role of the conscious mind versus the unconscious mind is, something that really fundamental. And I think that we as a culture we're in love with the conscious and don't recognize how really limited it is. If you are thinking too much about where you're putting your hands or how you're moving your arm or what the position that your leg is taking as you're landing or jump, you will fall, right? You will fail, you will miss things. You don't consciously control your heartbeat, right? You don't consciously control your digestion, because those older systems were built before the conscious mind even arose. And the conscious mind is way too limited, way too slow to be put in charge of such fundamental things. The same thing with movement, right? This is actually like a major problem in movement teaching, is that we think that motor control is or can be much more conscious than it really is. And so we tend to coach by telling people to try to control things with their mind that their mind has no business trying to control. Right? So how much should your glutes activate during a project? Well, if you spend a lot of your mental energy trying to do that, you won't jump well, because your glutes have to be synergizing with your hamstrings and your quadriceps and your calves and your feet and your, the movement up and down of the fluid in your core. And so you can tell yourself, like fire your glutes hard during a jump, but you just don't have the capacity to be precise enough in that to get that to be in correct rhythm and relationship to everything. So you have to focus on the environment and let the environment and the task and let the body figure it out. It is the body and the brain are actually continuous. There are neural control layers at the level of individual muscle spindle, right? And then they're going up all the way. So, some of the processing is happening at the level of the muscle fiber, some of it is happening in the joint, some of it is happening in the spinal cord, some of it is happening in the base of the brain. And then occasionally the conscious mind gets to have a say as well in certain aspects. But you have to rely on feel and on body intelligence, basically, in order to move on. In the same sense, you're reacting to things all the time in your life, whether it is the birds, right? Classic one is if you're walking through the woods and all of a sudden, kind of the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Quite possibly the birds have gotten silent because there's a predator. You, at a very intuitive level, like millions of years of evolution, know that information is relevant, even if you don't know that information is relevant. And so your body is sending up these signals to you all the time about the environment, what it's telling you. And you can't actually process all of it consciously. So part of what we're doing is actually saying that in order to be a well-developed human being, we have to educate intuitive systems just as much as the conscious systems.
Yeah, I love it. And something that we do in Plain Camp, which is something that people report is super beneficial, and they're really happy of it, is we do non-linguistic environments. So we all agree that we are not going to use words to explain the games we play or just to verbalize the experience. And I believe there is a link here between how much we play and how much our intuition gets developed. And the next question goes associated with if by this process of utilizing more our unconscious or intuitive mind, we start reading better the emotions of other people. We start relating better because we are playing more, we are more attuned, so we can start reading other people with our conscious mind getting in between.
Yeah. Well, I think that we actually have a cultural problem with attunement. Just as we're blind in some sense to the meaning of a tree, we're also blind to the meaning of other people's expressions and the way that they're holding their body. The more that we spend our time on screens, the more that we spend our time in text exchanges, the less that we are actually cultivating that sensitivity. One thing that is really fascinating, an exemplar of that, is how the brain restructures itself in order to read. So if you go all the way back to Socrates was very worried about books, about writing, because he believed that it would erode our memories, otherwise change us. And now we look back at that and we think, oh, that's kind of ridiculous. Writing is amazing. It's such a superpower. We only know about Socrates because of writing. But it turns out that there's actually some truth to what he was worried about. Joseph Henrich, in The Secret of Our Success, he talks about this fact. I believe it was there that I first encountered it. The part of the brain that's repurposed for writing, one of the parts of the brain that's repurposed for writing, is a part of the brain that's actually fundamental to facial recognition.
Nice.
So cultures that are non-literate actually recognize facial features faster and more powerfully than we do. So you can imagine that, reading a book. Okay. So then what if you're reading text all the time? How much are you rewiring yourself towards reading this kind of symbol versus the symbol of somebody's face? You think about how much we seem to be bad at relating to other people. A lot of it's because we don't. And when we don't do more than the talking part. So Jordan Peterson wrote a paper called, I think it's just called Play and the Regulation of Aggression. And the thesis in that paper is that the most powerful tool to teach social skills to young children is actually letting them play. They're highly, highly motivated to engage in some play. And it's a very sort of clear exemplar of enthusiastic consent versus overwhelming discomfort, right? So over time, you learn to model your behavior, to adjust your behavior in response to other people's signals so that you can continue to have play, right? If you hurt somebody, then they don't play with you. And then now you're motivated to try to change your behavior such that you won't be hurting people in the future so that people will continue to play. And we have demonized rough and play as proto-bullying or glorification of violence. And so we're taking children and we're preventing them from accessing this fundamental way of developing a deep, embodied, felt, touch-based, sensual experience of what it is to really know what somebody else is experiencing. And so we need, I forgot what your question prompt is, but we need to remember, we need to, John Vervaeke, one of my mentors, he talks about reinventio, right? Inventio is a word that comes from Greek that isn't the same as it's somewhere in between discover and invent. We need to reinvent the tools of attunement between individual human beings, such that avoid a lot of the miscommunication. And we need to recognize how much the tools that we leverage, like we are leveraging right now, can actually, it's forcing us into compromises, right? They're involved in choosing to use these technologies. And, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, but we might want to look at what the cost side of the cost benefit is and ask, what can we put in place to ameliorate some of those costs? With the printing press, here's another example. The printing press, who doesn't want to have lots of books? It used to be only very rich people could afford books because they took, hundreds of hours for a scribe to create. So now we have a printing press. It's wonderful, right? Well, the invention of the printing press in Europe is followed by 200 years of the most intense wars, because all of a sudden, as you have universal literacy or close to universal literacy, people don't have a sense-making apparatus to respond to pamphlets. Right? So you think about, how social media manipulates people into reactivity. This game has been going on for a long time.
Right.
Earlier of the printing press, they were putting out pamphlets attacking the king, attacking the nobles, attacking their church. And so, often there was real reasons for people to be upset. But what it did was it made it very easy to transmit social outrage between people. And then you have people hardening into their camps, and then you have the Reformation versus the Counter-Reformation, and then you have people just killing each other over their religion for 200 years. So eventually we kind of like figure out how to educate people in how to kind of swim through this kind of information ecosystem sufficiently so that at least they're going to stop killing each other. But now we're ramping that up. And what we don't recognize, we now are the inheritors of the cultural adaptations that allowed us to ameliorate the costs that the printing press brought us. We don't recognize those things as actually having to exist because the printing press produced new types of problems. And that puts us in a position of not recognizing that the next technology produces its own set of problems, and that we're going to need to be much faster at generating solutions that are relative to the cost side of the technology.
I'm trying to avoid speaking about AI because it's a topic that I've been like geeking a lot lately. So I'm going to redirect the question a little bit, but yeah, definitely. And actually, in my personal story, the advancement of AI is one of the reasons why I'm investing so much into Plain Camp, because I believe that this is where humans belong. Humans are beings and not doing. So in my ideal utopia, I believe like the AI will be doing things in our favor while we can invest more time into being. And we might not choose to go into the potentialities of creating pamphlets that are so personalized for each of us that we don't have a choice but just believe whatever we are fed in terms of information. So a question to finalize that I would like to ask goes more about the relationship, and especially because me as a male and you as a male, and I've seen that you are posting several videos with your kids and everything. So it goes more about the because my best memories when I was a kid with my father was rough and tumble play, right? So this idea of joyful connections, and you more personally as your experience as being a father. So what are the benefits and the healing power, I would say, of developing this positive relationship around play with the kids, and how playing as an adult can be healing for a person that didn't receive that when they were kids?
Yeah. So there's kind of multiple layers to that, because there's the aspect of fatherhood, which gets to questions of sex differences and what men need versus what women need, and what children need from men versus from women, how that plays out. But then there's just the fundamental question of what is the benefit of play for anybody. So generally, as we talked about play earlier, play is a way of developing behavioral flexibility by exploring different movement options, or behavioral options, right? Play doesn't have to be physical. You can role play. You can do theater. And if you played the villain, and you've played the heroine, and you played the sidekick, and you've been, in these different roles, if you utilize that tool right, it expands your own awareness of self in what you're doing. And maybe you want to play out, you want to understand the role that you're playing out and what it looks like, what kind of role, I'm playing the role of father. What is it? What is the type of father that I would admire, that I want to provide for my children? So that's within that. And then play, as we said, is a thing that attunes us to an environment. It tunes us to the natural world. It tunes us to our capacities to do things. It tunes us to our body, and it tunes us to other embodied agents, right? So if you play with people, you learn who they are in a deeper way. You connect and have rapport with them on a deeper way. And then we can look at play as a way of recognizing the dynamics of the metagame, right? So we say it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Well, what does that mean, right? What that means is that whether it's chess, parkour, or tennis, ultimately, greatest thing to get out of it isn't to be the best at that one thing. It's to learn from those practices, stuff that will help you be a better human no matter what is occurring. And that's the metagame. So those are just general benefits. Now, when we look specifically at, men and fatherhood, I think as a culture, we are suffering from a dearth of good masculine culture. I think that there was, I believe, and I'd like to do more research on this, but I believe there's essentially disruption in the transmission of male culture across time from father to child because of the Industrial Revolution, how it moved men from the family. In combination with big wars and alcohol and drugs and all those things, men have been sort of pushed out of the primary family structure and then also out of the education of children as children move into pseudo family structures and school systems. And I think that men and women there's an inherent polarity to male and female in how a child is raised in true word. Now, everyone contains both the male pole and the female pole in themselves, but by and large, men will act more to encourage children and women will act more to nurture children. So, and children will seek this themselves. So when my kids, if my kid falls down and skins their knee, if their mom is nearby, they don't want me. They will push me out of the way and scream if I try to pick them up if their mom's nearby. On the flip side, if they want to be thrown in the air, they'll come to me. So for them, a mother is inherently an affordance for nurture, and a father is inherently an affordance for encouragement. Now, some of the time, my wife's not there, and now I become the default. I play the maternal role. And that's something that's really important for me to be capable as a man. And when I'm not here, my kids want to wrestle with my wife. But it points out that, yes, we need to contain both. But children will asymmetrically use their parents for their own needs. Yeah. And we need to meet them with what they want from us, too. One thing to say, hey, everything's equal, men and women should be the same. I want you to treat your mother and me the same. Like, I do have to fight with my kids to some degree. Like, okay, I get to put you to bed half the time just so your mom has a break. Right? Like, equality is important, and there's utility to that because things can get very asymmetrical in who's putting energy into the children, and that can be really hard on particular mothers. But we have to recognize that dynamic is important, and that as a culture, most of our children haven't experienced what good masculine encouragement is. And that's a huge problem. So we need to be educating people back towards a remembrance, reinventing the positive masculine interaction with the child, what that means. And then, like an internal family systems perspective, maybe we need to have that inside all of us too. Maybe we're all missing it a little bit. My dad was great at roughhousing, young, but he was also kind of neglectful and not present. And so I have my wounds around that, but I also have that ability to call forth that playful masculinity. I've had that ever since I was a child. And I see it. My kids are very much hungry for it. There's been times when I've had health problems, things that have broken me down. And when they feel like they get to wrestle with their dad again, it's hugely important for them. So I think everyone needs play. And rough and tumble play, it's really important that we not code it as only for men or males. But at the same time, we do have to recognize that it is related to the polarity of male. And men have to go up in a way that recognizes where that's missed, what it can afford, and invites women into it too. And that's why I think, what we're doing, what you're doing, getting people together, getting them these kinds of play episodes, understanding the theory, understanding the research behind it, researching the type of practices that bring forth joy, that bring forth physical resilience, that bring forth emotional capacity is so important.
Yeah, totally agree. And even me on my observations of the whole playing camp and how it evolves, I can see so quickly how, women tend to do more imaginative, role-playing, objects-oriented, nurturing type of game. And the boys or the men, they go straight to who is strongest, who climbs faster, or who throws each other higher to the air. Rafael, Rafe. Thank you so much. It has been such an amazing, super insightful conversation, and I love to discover like how deep goes your theoretical, as well as I would love to experience the practical side of all your practice and evolve, move, play, and how versed you are into the different theories, as well as how you have walked us through the history of play and even playing the different cognitive structures, both conscious and unconscious, and lovely this polarity and these relationships, even with some notes of the world of linguistic and non-linguistic appearance in our life and the implications of it. And if you want to share something to the audience about the Evolve Move Play, how they can know more about you, about the workshops, about the retreats, so please.
Yeah, absolutely. So evolvemoveplay.com is a website. You can find our offerings there. We're very active on YouTube and Instagram as well. We also have Facebook and Twitter presence, but primarily the content we're putting on is going on YouTube and Instagram. We teach 3 week, 2 5-day, 1 8-day retreats a year. So in May, July is the longest one, and then September. So just had one spot open up for the September retreat. So that may disappear. So if people want to get on that, that'd be great. And then we will be opening sales for next year's retreats in October. And so people might want to get on the wait list for those that go very quickly. We take approximately 20 students per retreat. And then we have a series of online courses that are available to people. And then we have 2-day workshops that we're teaching. So right now, kind of exploring, offering some more 2-day workshops. So if folks know they have a strong community that would be really engaged with that and want to reach out to us, support@evolvemoveplay.com is how to do that.
Lovely. And if I were you, the listener, I would invite you to go and join the waiting list, because it's something that gets booked, sold out really quickly. And I cannot wait for the moment that I participate also in one of your retreats and workshops to feed my own self and consciousness and connect also and have this sense of community and nature that is so needed. Rafe, has been amazing to speak with you. Thank you so much. And for all the listeners, go to evolvemoveplay.com and explore more about Rafe's work, as well as Instagram. For me, it's a really nice source of information to see all these videos and a lot of inspiration. So I'm honored to have this conversation with you today. And I just can wish you the best for you and your family and for the whole Evolve Move Play community. So thank you very much.